So the workshop will basically help you to understand the purpose of literature review and requirements for writing it well, developing the research idea to research question and framing the theoretical construct, the significance of framework, theoretical constructs to guide you research, and the content analysis and academic discourse. So over to you, sir. Sir Asif.
Thank you. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Am I clearly audible?
Yes, sir. Loud and clear.
Okay, thank you. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. All right. As the title indicates, what I will focus on, inshallah, is going to be engagement with texts. And when I say text, in modern discipline of hermeneutics, can I see the participants? Is there any possibility I might be able to see them so that that really helps? I don't like seeing my own self while talking.
Participants are please requested to
turn
on their videos.
Yeah, there is a gallery view, isn't there? View, and there's this gallery view, I think.
Yes, sir. It's gallery view.
Standard. Okay, I still can't see any participant there. It would help.
There are a lot of participants with their videos turned on.
Tahir, please, if you take off the shared video, the slide, the screen will fill up with you. Check the agenda.
Yeah, now I can see people. Yes.
Yeah. That's better. Great.
Because with all my years in teaching, I'm still not used to soliloquies. I like to speak to others. Yeah. As I was saying, that the title itself is indicative of what I wish to focus on, which is engagement with texts. And in modern hermeneutics, text is not just what you read. It's anything that you interpret as the subject. Text is the object, you interpret it. And that is where all the complexity lies. Hermeneutics se to aap sab log waqif hain, all of you are aware of what hermeneutics is?
Asif, do explain as you go along the way. We have muted the participants so they won't be.
They won't be able to interact while I speak?
Gee, we would like to have it. No, they will be, but in the chat. And even in the chat, some is saying I have no PowerPoint. No, there is no PowerPoint, but I'm having connectivity issues.
Yeah.
So on.
There's no PowerPoint. I don't like to use PowerPoint at all.
Absolutely.
So
and then see if people warm up.
If people could interact, it would help. They couldn't ask me. Yeah. So for those who might not have gone into hermeneutics a lot, basically what I'm referring to is the art and science of interpretation of texts. And since it became popular with German scholars like Schleiermacher and others, moving on through Marxist discourses and developments brought by scholars as thinkers as Gadamer, up to modern times where we have postmodernist discourses on hermeneutics. The whole idea is how you interpret text. So ranging from considering text as sufficient unto itself, as Schleiermacher school would have it, to ideas of text and context and pretext introduced since the times of Gadamer, up to modern times where we talk about scholars as Jacques Derrida and postmodernism, where he introduced the idea of difference. Is anybody aware of this idea of difference that Jacques Derrida introduced? Okay, so the idea was that meaning of a particular text can move from one significance to another vis-a-vis the difference that is created by the dichronic and synchronic aspects of the creation of the text. Since the text was created maybe as a verbal statement, to the point where it's written down, to the point where it's received by the reader in a different time, a lot can happen. And moreover, there's also the difference in the actual reality of what is signified. So these are ideas that I'll discuss in more detail. And those are aspects that we sometimes do not understand while looking at a text. And this is where the whole complexity lies. One of the courses that I used to teach at McGill was Bible and Quran narratives, along with Professor Uguma, who was a professor of Christianity. So we used to do these things together. And hermeneutics, in a certain sense, became more significant in Western academia with biblical studies, because with the Catholic, with protests against the Catholic idea of the church having the final authority in determining the authorial intentionality or the will of God. Is everybody aware of Urdu? Because do I have to switch between languages, or should I stick to one?
We have international participants.
We have international participants, so they have difficulty. Okay, so the idea basically was that it's a very powerful statement, especially when, as Michel Foucault would have it, when power is attached to knowledge and to word, it becomes a very, very important statement. When somebody says, this is what God wants, and you believe in that God, and you believe in that interpretation as the will of God, then it becomes, if somebody says, having a beard this size is haram, this is the will of God. It's a powerful statement. It's the will of God that Rukhsana and I should leave our academia and go and do jihad with the Taliban against the Western powers. These statements are loaded and powerful statements. As soon as you believe in them, and if you grant the person making these interpretations the final infallible authority of determining God's will, that person has immense power. From the earliest times to modern times, when you begin interpreting constitution, law, the same problem lies. There's text, you interpret it, and becomes a very, very powerful tool. That applies not just to texts that are written down, anything that is interpreted. Take the Taj Mahal, for instance. Now, for most people, if you ask them, especially our Western friends, American friends, Canadian friends, you ask them, what does it signify to you? And they'll say, it's a symbol of love, amour. This emperor who fell in love. And then in comes Sahil Ludhianvi, the famous lyricist and poet, who's more well known for his song, Kabhi Kabhi Mere Dil Mein Khayal Aata Hai, than for Taj Mahal. But he comes in and gives a very different, and he says, what biggest lover in the world? What symbol of love? This was an emperor who was a despotic ruler. He was a dictator. They were invaders. He had the resources. This lady, Mumtaz Mahal, was the 8th wife who died with the 13th child, and he forced 22,000 laborers to work day and night. And he's the greatest lover. And he comes up with मेरी महबूब कहीं और मिलाकर मुझसे बज़्म शाही में गरीबों का गुजर क्या माने सप्त जिस राह पे हूँ सतपत शाही के निशान उस पे उल्फत भरी रूहों का सफर क्या माने तो मेरी महबूब पस पर्दा तशीर वफात तूने सतवत के निशानों को तो देखा होता मुर्दा शाहों के मकाबिर से बहलने वाली अपने तारीख मकानों को तो देखा होता अनगिनत लोगों ने दुनिया में मोहब्बत की है कौन कहता है कि सादिक न थे जज्बे उनके, लेकिन उनके लिए तशहीर का सामा नहीं, क्योंकि वो लोग भी अपनी ही तरह मुफलिस थे। ये चमनजार, ये मुनक्कश दरो दीवार, ये मेहराब, ये ताक, एक शहनशाह ने दौलत का सहारा लेकर हम गरीबों की मोहब्बत का उड़ाया है मजाक. And he changes the whole idea. For those who have not been able to understand, let me share my screen for once and give you an idea what I'm from a translation. Taj.
Asif, I really like the way you bring in different angles to your discussion to explain how a text can mean different things and can be interpreted differently and can be framed differently. And so the whole thesis that you're writing or research you are doing on a topic can be totally put up in a different theoretical construct, which takes you through the rest of the research. And I think that's the beauty that you bring in. I think you're unable to share your screen.
No, I can share. I am just taking out the portion. I'll just read. This is my own translation. It's available everywhere on Google. You can just type Asif Iftikhar, the Taj Mahal, and you'll find it's a translation. So just to let the international students participants, respected participants know, fellow colleagues know what I was talking about. It says something, it goes something like this: the Taj for you, beloved, depicted. This is my own translation. With its beauty, you be afflicted. Let our tryst be elsewhere, love. For what cause the poor may roam in gathering places of the rich, paths with symbols of their glory have no room for our love, our story. My love, undercover celebrate love. These signs of grandeur saw you not. Happy around the tombs of kings, our dingy homes, you just forgot. So it goes on to say, my love, they too did love so well. The Taj's beauty, whose toil shaped, he's talking about the laborers, graves of their loved ones unmarked, none on them a candle placed. The engraved walls and doors, the arches, this orchard, the Jamna bank, this palace, an emperor through his wealth has shown to a poor man's love, disparaging malice. Let our tryst be elsewhere, love. So, like, I mean, just a simple act of interpretation, and the whole symbol and the meaning and the significance changes. And this is the power of hermeneutics, the power of interpretation. And in fact, it's a discipline that began with biblical studies, because when Martin Luther argued that no, if the consensus of the church is the final and infallible expression of God's will, why are there logical contradictions in the discourse of the church itself, which he could see as a trained clergyman who was well trained in mathematics and logic, as were the medieval churchmen of those times. And he talked about going back to the text. That's where your fundamentalism emerged from. Fundamentalism basically means going back to the fundamentals, going back to the text. And this is what created in the Western academia a malaise, if you call it, or an inclination, if you want, which Derrida also talks about, the logocentrism of the West. They have this, and we have it too as the Muslim peoples, but they have it too. There's a logocentric focus on the deontology of the text. We derive our meanings, our ethics, our significance from a given text, from the deons, from the rules, deontology, and we are logocentric. And that is what happened. So he went back to the text against the wishes of the church, and he said, this is where Protestantism began. This is how it began. So the Protestant idea was going back to the fundamentals of the Bible, and the text became very, very important, more important than esoteric interpretations of the church. And as soon as that happened, it opened the door for looking at the text in different ways, from Schleiermacher and his followers who said that the text is sufficient into itself, everything should come out of the text, to people like Gadamer, who argued that the context is important and the text you can never fully recover the actual context. So there's going to be some compromise, to the postmodernists and Marxists who argued about the underlying power involved in the text. You have to be, as a modern researcher, you have to be aware of these aspects to really engage with the text meaningfully. Otherwise, and the discourses that are emerging, the ways of looking at if you don't do that, then you're stuck with that particular idea that this is what the symbol stands for, whereas the world has already interpreted it in a plethora of ways, and you need to have those contestations and engagements to reach your own conclusion about the text, even before you begin to cite or quote it. So you need to have those skills to understand how the how the text works and how to engage with the text. And although it began with biblical studies, the disciplines and the theories that emerged very soon had an impact on other areas as well. In law, for instance, how could you not look at legal text in the same way? We all know as Pakistanis that the text can be interpreted in so many different ways. It reminds me of that famous satire novel, Alice in Wonderland, which was actually written for adults, but abridged for children. Children read more than adults as were the intended readers. And there's a portion where Alice says to Humpty Dumpty, and he says, she says, the question is whether you can make the words mean so many different things. And Humpty Dumpty replies, the question is, who's the master? That's all. So how the text assumes different meanings is something we're very well aware of. If you read George Orwell's 1984, you can see how when the or Animal Farm, for instance, by George Orwell, where they have the animals, when they take over from the humans, have their manifesto, all animals are equal, and they add a proviso, all animals are equal, but for the pigs, who are the politicians, basically, in his fantasy story, which is a satire. And he says, some animals are more equal than others. So the modification emerges. How are these meanings created is something so important that presently, one of the most important disciplines researched upon at MIT, which is basically a technology-focused institution, is hermeneutics. Artificial AI, as we all know, has taken over the world. And I've been writing about this for the last 10. Recently, 3 of my articles were published on AI and hermeneutics, how interpretation takes. And I'd written some of these articles much before ChatGPT took over. And I'd explained how the idea of sanat-e-iham in poetry, how poets create ambiguity, and whether or not that ambiguity could then be emulated by AI. And these are very, very important aspects, and it has an impact on law, as it did soon after biblical studies. In hermeneutics, it became a very, very important area. I remember about 20 years ago, one of our very esteemed judges, who was earlier the Chief Justice of Lahore High Court and now is in the Supreme Court, Justice Mansoor Ali Shah, used to be a colleague with me at LUMS. We used to teach together, and before that, we used to teach. He taught a different subject, corporate law, and I used to teach Islamic jurisprudence. So we worked together, and before that, in a law college together. And I remember when I was going abroad for my PhD, he asked me what exactly I was working on. I said, legal hermeneutics. This is what I'm going to work upon. And he said, really, what the hell is that? Because in the British system where he went, it was not important at that time, 20 years ago. Now it is. And US had already, at Harvard, for instance, already made it compulsory. I still have the book that is used at Harvard somewhere. So it's a hefty book on legal hermeneutics, because lawyers, they argued, needed to understand how to engage with text. How can you ascribe meaning? How can you say this is what the statement of the law means if you do not have the ability to understand how the text can mean different things, and how then when you are involved in contestations, you argue for the contestation that you believe is a fairer or sometimes even, as some people claim, the univocal expression of the intentionality of the text. So authorial intentionality became important, to the point where you have people like Jacques Derrida and other postmodernists, who sometimes did not even like to be identified as postmodernists, who argued that authorial intentionality has already become elusive. There's no way you can actually even decipher authorial intentionality to the fullest extent. Like, for instance, appropriating the idea of difference by Derrida. If I tell my subordinate, look, I have a delegation coming from abroad, some very close friends are coming from abroad, and it's a delegation, it's a very important business dinner, but I will not be available. So in my absence, please show them a good time. What does that mean? Maybe judging from the fact that I was educated at HSN and I still am friends with my old colleagues from there, and maybe because I went to McGill and because I write poetry, romantic poetry also. So maybe he decides to show them a good time through Chateau Lafitte's Rothschild. One bottle costs about £3,000, so vintage. But if my friends turn out to be my friends from the Tablighi Jamaat, then this is definitely not what I meant. So the idea of different, or the most heard statement in the world after happy birthday to you, I love you, or je t'aime beaucoup, or ana buhibbek, whatever expression you use. What does it really mean from the Christian conception of till death do us part to Jean-Paul Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir, the mother of feminism, their conception of existentialist love, where the idea was till we find it relevant, or maybe to the Pakistani existential, reality of till death do us part. So what does it really basically mean? Those are ideas that become very important when you engage with the text. And in each tradition that I have studied in the 7 languages that I work with, which include Arabic and Persian and Hindi and English, Urdu, Punjabi, and so some of these languages. In each of these traditions, there has been a discursive tradition, a very strong discursive tradition of discourses that have developed their own views and even disciplines of looking at how the text, one needs to engage with text. For instance, in Usul Fiqh and Usul Tafsir that I talk about and teach, there are ideas of how beginning from how the text becomes qat'i or how it becomes zanni, which is univocal or probable, and then how exactly you decipher something which is clear in the text to the point where it's just in the isharatun nas or the iqtiza'un nas, corollary of the text, or an implication of the text. So we have complete disciplines ranging beginning from the times of E.G., the famous 14th century scholar, to modern times in Central Asia, Al-Azhar, in the Western world, beginning from Share Market up to Paul Ricoeur, and so many others who are still working on hermeneutics. This is an important idea. So the point I'm trying to make here is that whichever discipline you have, and it has importance in science as well. I mean, let's not think that the science does not engage with these ambiguities of texts, even of interpretation, because things are not as certain in higher science as many of you who are far more entrenched in science than I am, because that's not my discipline. I am only a user and a reader, but some of you are experts, so most of you would know. I mean, beginning with simple concepts like 0 or 1. What is 0? It's just it's in my mind. When I say, one table that I'm sitting at, why is it one table? Why is it not, 5 pieces of wood? And why is it a table? And why is it not a dancing floor for tap dancing? I mean, these are categories that have meaning only because we have chosen to give them meaning in a certain way. So those conceptions up to higher areas like the idea of spontaneous generation, for instance, the time of Louis Pasteur, where by scientific method, it was almost established that spontaneous generation was a scientific fact. And in comes Louis Pasteur, and he does his experiments at École Normale in France, and he shows that if you pasteurize, then life or generation cannot be spontaneous. To Stephen Hawking, who talked about the idea of nothingness as the nothingness particle that we all know through his work. And one would imagine that when he says nothingness, he's really referring to the nothingness of philosophy, which is Adam, the absence of presence. That's not what he's talking about. His nothingness has properties. It has an energy field. So it's not the same nothingness. As soon as you engage with text, you have to understand what exactly is happening. I'll give you one final example, and then maybe because I was told to let students, participants engage as well. So let me give you an example that just came across. In my cousin's group today, I was looking at a very beautiful song by Alan Fakir. It's called Tiritawndi. I translated it somewhere. It's from it's in Sindhi language, and it's a beautiful song. I mean, Gaur Sahab, is there any way we could play it? Alan Fakir ka song. I can translate it.
I can try. I'm not
अगर
sure.
आप यहाँ दिखा दें तो बड़ा अच्छा लगेगा.
The name is
Tiritawndi.
Tera Khaya.
Maybe I can.
Teri.
Yeah, Alan Fakir. If you type Alan Fakir and
Yes.
then Teri or Tiri, and
Yeah,
then
Tiri. For
and
Wanda.
Pawndi.
Yes, I got that. I'll try
Can
to
you play
share.
that song? Yeah, could you play that song, please?
And don't play it more than 2 minutes. We have.
It's just 2 minutes.
Anji.
It's a 2-minute song.
Can you hear it?
No.
No, I can. I think so. There's just give me a second.
Asif, when you talk about the different dimensions of interpretations and engagement with the text, are there any set structured approaches? You did talk about different approaches along the way. But if you want,
Okay. Did you get it, or should I play it?
I got it. Just give me a second. I'm going to play it through a loudspeaker because the
Okay.
Zoom is not taking YouTube sound.
Okay.
Just give me a second.
So, you know,
Sorry,
there are
you go.
strategies, there are approaches, there are frameworks. So are you going to take us also through all of those to explain?
I will just be pointing out in a few moments some of the works that, because it's a huge discipline, it's taught now. I mean, it's taught at the undergrad level. LUMS now, it's one of the compulsory courses. As I said, at Harvard, it's a compulsory course, and almost everybody, you know, I mean, every student is supposed to know these things. They don't even talk about things without using that. I mean, if you don't know, for instance, what exactly is the idea of difference, if you don't know what Foucault means by othering, for instance, what Edward Said means by when he appropriates the idea of othering.
Can you listen to it now?
Yeah, I can.
Really sorry.
har har kare hulla la la tade milanda si tade milanda si tiri ponju tari Stop it there. Stop it there. So the translation basically goes something like this. It's basically a Sufi song. It's a Sufi song where the poet is talking about temporal love. And as you know, in Sufi writings, temporal love also often becomes the symbol of divine love. It's used as a symbol, and sometimes they're interchanged as well. So he's basically talking about how he's parted from the beloved, an idea that is there in Sufism since the times of Sufi poetry, since the times of Rumi, when he talks about severance of the ney of the reed flute from the roots, and he says Sine khahim shurah shurah az firaq tabigoyim sharhi darde ishtiyaq, that the reed flute, when it was severed from its roots, from its foundation, began lamenting that it wanted to wish for a heart tone with holes so that it could do the shara of the tafsir, the exegesis of the pain of its love. So that's the idea here. And he's saying how we were separated and we'll meet again when the red roses bloom and when the tears roll down from the cheeks as pearls, when they have been converted into pearls by the harshness of the effort and endeavor of love. And then we'll meet again. And our parting was the folly of the days of youth. But we'll meet again when the cranes come back and do har har with it's an onomatopoeia, with their flying, that's when we'll meet again. So it's longing for the beloved, it's longing for the divine. But I would now like to share the screen, and something that I just saw in the morning, and I thought this is so interesting. In my way. This is something that a cousin sent, and this is an Indian lady expressing the same idea. Can I share the screen as well, Gaur Sahab?
Yes, sir, you can. You have the co-host rights.
I have the co-host rights.
Asif, I'd also like to remind you that we have 15 minutes left for this session.
I'm just going to end with this clip. It's very short, but I'll just want a few words from this lady, and I'll end the discussion there. And then I'll respond to some of the questions that have emerged in the next session. Okay, so let's just see this clip. How do I share my screen? Okay, here it goes. Screen sharing and
Asif, I think the voice is not clear.
Okay. So she's basically saying that the poem is talking about meeting each other, and she's referring to the divide between India and Pakistan. How India and Pakistan, this is what she says, this is what the poet is talking. She's explaining to a Western audience, and she's saying that the poem is talking about how India and Pakistan got partitioned and how we'll become one again, how the queer people with their own discourses, I mean, by queer, I mean the queer discourse, and the gay people and the straight people will join again, and these differences will vanish. So regardless of which point of view you accept or reject in your mind and in your conscience, what I want to point out towards is the appropriation, the idea of appropriation, that she is using the same text and giving an entirely different meaning. Now, when the contestations happen, what are the mechanics of that engagement? What are the mechanics that you use even in your writing to argue that so even before you begin your empirical research, the point where you develop your hypothesis, whenever you come up with a statement that needs to have meaning before research can move ahead, you need to be aware of the contestations of meaning and how you can then use the argumentation that is valid in a research paper for asserting that this is what you are going to focus on, and this is how you see the statement, and this is what you are going to research upon. So that's what I wanted to talk about for now, but more on this later in the second session. Thank you.
Asif, is there any readings that you would suggest to get? You have talked very beautifully about how any text, it can be taken from the approach or a framework that a person has developed and can be directed in interpretation towards that direction. So in actuality, it is the interpretation of that theoretical construct that the author has or the writer has that divide. But there must be some material which talks about these different types of theoretical constructs, like we did the epistemology, and in there was the objective, the subjective, the realist, or so on. So are there some divisions like that?
Absolutely. And epistemology is very directly related to hermeneutics, because even before you talk about the hermeneutics, hermeneutical aspect itself, you have to talk about the validity of what you are using, the source validity. You know, the source that you're using. You say, for instance, I've seen so many research papers, MPhil papers written in Pakistan, and they get disappointed because nobody trains them in this way.
Yes.
Recently, a girl who's now finished her MPhil, she had actually done her MPhil, and she was trying to apply abroad, and she showed me a thesis, and it began with, God says this is in the Hadith. Where is this Hadith from? Have even looked at the epistemic certitude of the text and the traditions. Do you know, you know, the gentleman, Rizvi, Khadim Rizvi Saab, you know, what do these college students know? There's a whole tradition of epistemology. You just can't come out and say, God says this, or Louis Pasteur says this, Qaid Azam said this, such scientist said this. You have to verify the source. You have to understand there are contestations on the verification itself. And the second aspect is, when you say this is what he's trying to say, then you have to go through contestations. A lot of literature. There are so many. If you just type the word hermeneutics, or even on a source as unverifiable as Wikipedia itself, it will give you a plethora of sources, from introductory courses on hermeneutics to specialized courses on hermeneutics to actual works of writers ranging from Schleiermacher, to Paul Rico and others, and modern scholars of hermeneutics. So these are things, the courses which are being taught at LUMS, at Harvard, at almost every good university. But let me give you an example of how this happens. For instance, one of the numerous approaches is a philological approach towards the text. Philological approach. And that has never gone out of fashion, although there's a very strong movement from philology to reader response theory, where the person will talk about how the reader is receiving the text, right?
Absolutely.
And then the social aspects. Let me give you one example, if I may. May I?
Please.
Yeah. So one example is a conversation that I was having with some scholars who had come from University of Notre Dame, and we were having a conference, and the professor there was talking about some of these ideas, and we were referring to Muhammad Asad, the famous person who translated the Quran. You know, Talal Asad's father. Talal Asad is a big name in anthropology. In fact, his ideas, the ideas by Talal Asad, McIntyre, Sabah Mahmood, these are ideas that need to be read, because if you go through the the social aspects of hermeneutics, then these are writers that one needs to be aware of to understand what words mean. So he said that, you know, we were talking about this issue of slavery, and he said, well, Muhammad Asad has resolved this problem because Awma Malakat Aymanuhum, basically that the believers safeguard their chastity except with their wives. or do not have relations except with the wives, or slave girls. Now, this was a big problem in modernism, Islamic modernism. A lot of modernists have tried kind of
to skirt around
come to grips with the problem. So Muhammad Asad, and he said, look, Muhammad Asad has resolved that problem. I was talking to a very well-known senator sometime before this discussion. He also said Muhammad Asad resolved that problem. So I said, that's fine. And he gave historical instances. Then history, this has what they were citing historical resources. But when you get into the text, then the text itself is going to create a problem. For instance, the verse would be translated as, believers do not have relations or safeguard their chastity. Yahfazu furujahum, that's the word. Let's say I'll safeguard their chastity only with their wives, or with those that their right hands possess. That's the slave girls. So I said, kindly translate it. Believers safeguard their chastity with their only with their wives or wives. If this is what the word means. So philology itself, the way the sentence is structured, another word which has become very problematic for all Pakistanis right now, for all educated Pakistanis, certainly, Rukhsana, you might have an opinion as there as well, is the famous Ar-Rijalu Qawwamuna 'ala an-Nisa verse. Men are custodians of women. And it's unfortunately now referred to as the wife-beating verse. But it begins with Ar-Rijalu Qawwamuna 'ala an-Nisa. Men are heads, rulers. Qawwam means ruler or head of the family. Over women. Ar-Rijalu Qawwamuna 'ala an-Nisa. Bima anfaqu min amwalihim, because they spend money on them, and because bima anfaqu bima fadala ba'dhum ala ba'd, because one is superior to the other. That is, men are superior to the to women. That's the traditionalist understanding, not traditional understanding, traditionalist. And by the way, you also need to understand these typologies, the social type. What is a traditionalist? What is a modernist? What is a postmodernist? A modern, for instance, Abul Ala Maududi, who's often considered to be a very atavistic person, Qadamat Pasand, was as much a modernist as Dr. Fazlur Rahman from University of Chicago, who introduced the idea of a right of divorce to women in terms of methodology of going back to the text. So now, if you read that text, Amina Wadud, the famous lady who led the prayer and has become very famous in feminist discourses. Feminist discourse. Feminism is another thing you can't ignore to not read. You can't afford not to read. That's something you have to read. So Amina Wadud argues that Qawwam here means not head of the family, but responsible for spending money on women, because they go in the family way, and then they are not always able to earn money. So she's giving sociological, anthropological arguments. But philology will then have this contestation, and the ulama then counter that through philology. Philology is the strength of the ulama, and they'll say, please translate, men are responsible for spending money, or men spend money on women because this is a correlating clause. We call it ataf in philology. It's an ataf clause. It's correlating. So both clauses should work together in the same way grammatically, because men are responsible for spending money on women. And the second clause says because they spend money on women.
You know what, Asif, you are doing?
The first sentence says men are heads over women, or heads of the family over women, because they spend money on. So philology will create contestations. I'm not saying which is right, which is wrong.
Yeah.
You just can't quote the verse and say, well, this is what the verse means.
Yeah.
Write a research paper, and your examiners, your evaluators in the international academic community will first, why did you not engage with Amina Wadud? What do you think about this person? Why are you not talking about that particular interpretation? How did you just reach that conclusion on your own? Unless, of course, you think you are Albert Einstein himself. You have to go through this maze, this labyrinth, to create a viable discourse in your paper.
Asif, what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave this session for a short while. Gohar will give you some of the questions. And I think in a progression, we'll continue with the same session so that we go on to, because there are two interrelated topics about research ethics now. I think we need to put a closure to what you really meant by the different constructs and what are some of the initial readings all of us should do. Please do make a reference to understand the whole, the context of what you just talked about. I think next time we'll put up a precondition of some basic readings to understand these theories and these, constructs that have come through with so much knowledge. I will beg leave because there's another session. I'll start it and I'll come back to this session.
Thank
Gohar,
you.
will you please continue with this session? Thank you. We have.
Yes,
There's
ma'am.
one very important question. I can just briefly respond to it. May I?
Please do. No, please do, because this is your session.
I can see one session where somebody's talked about the level of expertise that is required. And for instance, if you're writing about Islam, do you need to have all this background of Arabic and Persian and blah, blah, blah? The trick is, I'm talking about the actual, the modus operandi, or let me even use the word totka for researchers. The trick is that when you do, you can look at, for instance, you're writing about this idea of the custodianship of men over women in a family setup. You're writing about this. Now, what kind of research are you doing is important. Are you writing as an expert? Are you just assuming that this is what the verse means and it's a big no-no? Obviously, you need to have awareness. So one of the most important things in any research methodology, and all of you, I'm sure, already know that as a general rule, is that you define your scope very well. If you are able to say that, look, I am taking this particular version, this particular understanding, which is traditionalist understanding of those, traditionalists basically refer to those scholars who do not wish to challenge the authority of the past based on certain epistemic confines, as ijma, for instance, consensus of past scholars, like Catholics, for instance, they do not wish to go out of the realm of interpretations by their own church, the consensus of the bishops. So those, you take that traditionalist interpretation, you say, I want to look at the legal implications of this, or sociological implications of this. And that would create the valid scope for your particular area in terms of your own expertise. In rape laws, for instance, you can say that I want to look at not just the idea of 4 male witnesses, but at the problems that are created by this idea at a sociological level, at a political level, at a legal level, at an anthropological level. So there are ways, but not being aware of this idea and jumping into a scope which is not yours and then making assertions which are not research-based can land you into a lot of problems.
Thank you so much. I have launched the Zoom polling. You all are requested to please respond to that. And meanwhile, we just quickly, for the people who are asking about the session at 1, we'll start. It's with Sir Iftikhar, Sir Asif, and we will start at in around another 5 minutes maximum. So, sir, quickly, I'll go over the comments and questions. So talking about a comment, we have a comment from Mr. Saleh. He's from the English department at Former Christian College. He says ambiguities of the text lead to skepticism, and skepticism leads to interpretations, and interpretations lead to knowledge creation. So this is just a comment. And then there was a question from Hafiz Rukhsar that you talked about the text and context of the text. So please, how we can build up on a research idea in literature, stepwise approach. Please give your expert opinion in the context of research to build an idea or argument. So if you can quickly, within, I would say 30 seconds, if you can answer to that, Sir Asif.
Yeah, you could have given me an easy task conquering India in 30 seconds. Uh,
Sorry.
okay. Yeah. So I respond to the second question because that's an easy one to respond to. There's a lot of literature. You just have to open up any encyclopedia. There's introductory texts almost by every major publisher. You can begin with, for instance, Jonathan Culler's literary criticism or criticism, introduction to literary criticism. It's a good introduction. It will give you a bibliography and then you can build up your base, but you need to know some of the main things. There's also an excellent article by MIT on hermeneutics. It's called AI and AI and hermeneutics, and gives you a number of readings that you can go. So it might not be a bad idea to begin with some of these easier introductory readings and then focus in on some of the more important readers. Along with that, it's also important to be aware of social sciences, even for scientists, even for medical doctors, practitioners. We cannot afford not to know about people from Durkheim to Talal Asad and McIntyre and others, if we need to talk about phenomenon or phenomena that relate to our society and our living.
Thank you, sir. About the comments, we have a comment from Ms. Maria. Today's session is the most interesting one and very unique in its nature. The session about engaging the text was quite intellectually engaging itself. And then we have again a comment from Saleh that meaning is a playground where contexts are always in contestation with each other. Meaning is polyphonic in nature. And then
that's an assertion, by the way, but there are contestations on this idea. There's a strong debate on whether or not the text can be qat'i, univocal, or does it always remain ambiguous. So there's a huge debate on it.
and there's
and contestations never end. Contestations never end. As soon as you make an assertion, even in science, you have to reach some point. Imagine the plight of a judge who has to decide whether or not the person is guilty, or whether or the example of a person who's about to hang a person till death. Then we can go on to what to the point where we say what exactly is hanging and what exactly is death. So there are limits to ambiguity itself as well. It's important to know there are philological, sociological, anthropological limits on the plurality of meanings.
We'll end with this last comment that this talk was a great example of darya ko kuze mein band karna, lekin tishnagi reh gayi. So this is actually true that we have a session coming up. We are 4 minutes late for that as well. Otherwise, we would have continued with the questions and comments. So for all the registrants who want to join the second session, you can please join the new link and we'll start that within a minute. Sir, see you in the next session, please. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Do I have to
switch the link? Yes, sir. Switch the link. I've sent you another link.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, sir. Thank you, everyone.